Yes, sir. Right away, sir.
Hello everyone, my name is Samir, and it is finally time for my Dark Knight guide. Just to talk about a little bit of my credentials, I've been raiding for about 3 years now, primarily on caster, but for the Cruiserweight tier, I ended up switching to Dark Knight for parsing, and I ended up the tier rank 1 ASP. And so, I'm here to share that all with you today. For the sake of this guide, I'm going to go ahead and assume you already know the basics of Dark Knight. This is because one of my core beliefs when it comes to optimization is that you need to have the fundamentals mastered first. So feel free to come back once that's done. So the very first thing we should look to do when wanting to optimize on Dark Knight is to pull on time. Whenever the boss is in melee range, this process is very easy. We simply start with hard slash. Where it gets tricky is if the boss cannot be pulled from melee range. In that case, we have two options. We can either unmend or we can use shadow stride into hard slash. Using unmend isn't something you should rule out right away. It's a very consistent way to pull the boss, and the damage you lose for using unmend is very minimal. That said, this video is about optimization, and we wouldn't be optimizing if we weren't trying to squeeze every little bit of damage. So that brings us to our second option, which was shadow stride into hard slash. When we want to go with this option, we want to be a little careful because using shadow stride can actually pull the boss before our character actually connects to the hitbox. But worry not, because you don't have to go figure out the timing. I have it right here. If we use shadow stride anywhere between 0.7 and 0.2 seconds, we will not pull the boss early. Now, the closer you are to that 0.6 seconds, the closer to 0 your hard slash will register. Now, I wouldn't worry about trying to get this perfect every single time, because more likely than not, the variance and pull times normally won't cost you anything. There's also no shot you're pulling at the exact same time every pull without cheating. So really, don't worry about it. The next thing we have to go over is pre-pulling your TBN. Now, more often than not, you've probably seen your favorite Dark Knight player use their TBN in hopes that it'll proc when the fight starts. This is in hopes to get 1 out of combat mana tick and to avoid overcapping in our opener. This is very common and generally not a big deal, but it starts to become a little bit of an issue when you have 2 Dark Knights. You see, bosses don't attack fast enough to be able to proc 2 TBNs casted in the pre-pull. So how do you go about getting that mana with the 2 Dark Knights? The answer, of course, is really obvious. You just have the Dark Knight take turns. But you could probably understand that getting your shot at a run 50% of the time could be pretty boring. Which leads us to probably one of the biggest misconceptions Dark Knight has currently. You don't actually need to pre-pull TBN 100% of the time. The true answer to determine if you need to pre-pull TBN or not is to find out if a fight has constraints in which you'll lose out on an edge. If we take a look at my dancing green rotation, which, by the way, rank 1, you can see that when we compare to other Dark Knights, we don't lose a single edge. Again, this is because the fight simply didn't require me to pre-pull my TBN. But let's take a look at my Howling Blade rotation, which, wow, also rank 1. We can see that I do pre-pull TBN, and that's because the downtime in the fight caused me to lose an edge because of the kill time we were going for. So basically, in order to find out if you should be pre-pulling TBN or not, you'd have to spreadsheet. I know, not everyone's favorite, but we've got to do what we got to do. So that's step number 1. Figure out how you want to pull the boss, and figure out if you need to pre-pull TBN or not. Now we're going to talk about openers, and for the sake of squeezing out every little bit of damage possible, we're not going to use the opener recommended by the balance, which is to unmend. Instead, we're going to use the shadow stride into hard slash opener. And this is the opener. Now, you're going to notice pretty quickly that there's nothing crazy going on here. The only thing that can really change in the Dark Knight opener is when you're summoning your shadow and when you're using your cooldowns. Other than that, you're going to be performing the same set of weapon skills every time. I quickly want to go over the placement of Disesteem in this opener, and that we're using it very early in the buff window to avoid one problem, and that's overcapping on mana. Like I said earlier, we have tons of ways of generating mana within our combo, but not all of our buttons give us that mana instantly. In front of you right now, and in the description below, we have an application delay for every job for DAWNTRAIL, and if we take a look at Dark Knight, we can see that Disesteem has a 1.65 second delay. This means that after pressing Disesteem, the damage will go off 1.65 seconds after it's pressed. But that also means that's when we get our mana, which is plenty of time to spend before we overcap. All of that is to say, don't look at Disesteem just as your big spender button. Look at it as a way to manage your mana. So, to reiterate for the opener, the biggest thing you want to avoid is overcapping on mana. Now let's move on to the loop, or in other words, your filler. Dark Knight's filler is very simple. You have a few things you want to accomplish. Number 1, keep Darkside running. Number 2, use things on cooldown. Number 3, avoid overcapping on gauge and mana. And number 4, breaking 1 TBN to smuggle over to your burst window. Now, pressing 1, 2, 3 and keeping your buttons on cooldown is very simple, so I'm not going to go over that too much. But keeping your Darkside up and smuggling over a TBN for the burst window is where a lot of Dark Knights mess it up. Generally speaking, unless fight design prevents this, you should be aiming to get 5 edges in your burst window. And the way we do that is by carrying over an edge that we've gotten from breaking TBN. But like I said earlier, we also have to keep up our Darkside, so that means we have to use an edge to do that. I have this golden rule that is very easy to follow for setting up a 5-edge burst window. And that rule is you want to spend 9,000 mana in between one burst window and the next. This allows us to spend 2 edges, which provides 60 seconds of Darkside in total, and 1 TBN to smuggle over. The way Darkside works is every time you spend an edge, it gives us 30 seconds worth of Darkside, capping out at 1 minute total. But we would need 2 minutes of Darkside in order to make it to the next burst window. What I said earlier about spending that 9,000 mana is true, but we want to space out where we spend it. The easiest way to go about this is whenever your gauge hits 30 seconds, spend an edge. The only time we want to ignore this rule is when we're actually getting ready to burst. In that case, you're free to let the timer drop down as low as it can go, because you're going to be spending all of your edges in the burst window and sending it right back up to 60. So to recap, our filler window consists of using our abilities on cooldown, spacing out our edges to keep up Darkside, and smuggling an edge for the burst window. The whole purpose of the filler rotation is to get us to what I like to call the perfect burst window. And that window looks like this. We get our Scarlet Delirium combo, a Disesteem, 2 Blood Spillers, sometimes 3, 5 edges, Carved Split, Salted Earth, 2 Shadowbringers, and parts of our 1, 2, 3 combo. Now, in my opinion, Dark Knight is a very linear job, in the sense that going between our opener, our filler, and our 2-minute burst feels like you're walking on a straight path. As long as you're pressing your buttons on cooldown and in order and not overcapping, you're going to achieve this burst window almost every single time. The times you won't be able to achieve this burst window will be because of the design of the encounter you are doing. I know so far a lot of this has been very simple information and you've probably already come to these conclusions for yourself. But something that's unique to Dark Knight, or ADPS jobs in general, is that we don't have a raid buff that we have to perform well into. Which means we can take our rotation and craft it on a per fight basis. Alrighty. Now that we've talked about all of that, let's go ahead and put it into practice. And in front of you, I have my dancing green log. The reason I wanted to showcase this log in particular is because the order in which you're pressing your buttons can seem pretty static when it comes from fight to fight, but there are actually things we could be doing to gain damage on a per fight basis. And I feel like dancing green is one of the easiest examples that I could showcase. So without further ado, here is my dancing green rotation. If we look at the start, nothing crazy. Like I said earlier, I found out that I did not need to pre-pull TBN here, so I don't. This increased my odds in trying to get a run to 100%. Moving forward, everything up to the 2-minute burst window is pretty standard. We get our 5 edges and buffs, we get all of our cooldowns, and we have a really strong pot window. Where it gets interesting is when we start to get to the Dancing Groove buff. As you can see, I start to spend all of my resources whenever the buff is active. So I decided to use 3 of my edges, a Shadowbringer, and 3 Blood Spillers. Again, the Dancing Groove buff is about 3%, and since Dark Knight doesn't have a raid buff, we're not actually losing anything by doing this. Now, a quick disclaimer I wanted to mention is that playing outside of buffs is generally not acceptable. You should only be doing this with the consent of all 7 of your other party members. Moving forward, as we can see, the following burst window is significantly weaker in terms of contribution to the raid, but again, because Dark Knight doesn't have a raid buff, my personal DPS went up because we took advantage of the Dancing Groove buff. Moving forward, now I'm going to skip to the next burst window, and that is because you'll notice that, again, we're performing a weaker burst window to take advantage of the Dancing Groove buff. So because of that, we only use 1 Shadowbringer here, and if we scroll further, you'll see that that Shadowbringer gets relocated to where we would next get that buff. You also noticed that I drifted my Delirium in order to be able to fit the entire combo in the Dancing Groove buff. Now, what I said earlier about keeping your abilities on cooldown is true, but you can drift your cooldowns and abilities to make sure you maximize your potency so long as you don't lose a usage over the entire fight and in buffs, which leads us to the final burst window. As you can see, we have a perfectly timed potion, all of our cooldowns, and we don't lose any usage. But you'll notice I also got 3 Blood Spillers in the end, and that is because I actually overcap on gauge towards the end. Now, overcapping on gauge is something generally you don't want to do, but over the course of the fight, we're only going to get a set amount of blood spillers. This means that as long as we get that amount, it actually doesn't matter how much we overcap. And so I decided to overcap here, which allowed me to delay the blood spiller, allowing it to fit inside the burst window. And as you can see, we end completely gauge neutral. Now, over the course of this explanation, those of you who are observant would have noticed that sometimes I drift my salted earth, and this is to put it in buffs. The concept of drifting your cooldowns applies here too. You're going to get a limited amount of usages of salted earth per encounter. So over the course of an encounter, make sure you try to find out how many salted earths you can drift to buffs without losing a usage. So for 8-minute fights like Dancing Green, you can do this once. Next, I want to go over Dark Knight's AoE rotation. Dark Knight gains damage on 3 or more targets. Whenever we're faced with 3 or more targets, instead of Edge of Shadow, we want to use Flood of Shadow. Instead of Carve and Split, we want to use Abyssal Drain. And instead of our 1-2-3 combo, we want to use Unleash into Stalwart Stole into Quatus. We also want to use all 3 stacks of Delirium on Impalement. Now, this also depends on fight design, but where a lot of Dark Knights will also try to min-max their damage is with their Living Shadow. You see, Living Shadow also has abilities that naturally cleave, and we want to make sure that that cleave is hitting every single target. Now, the way Living Shadow works is that after it's summoned, it's going to start attacking your primary target. Now, the reason this matters is that Living Shadow is going to cast the same thing every time, no matter if it's single target or multi-target. So that's Abyssal Drain, Shadow Stride, Shadow Bringers, Edge of Shadow, Blood Spiller, and Disesteem. Now, like I just said, your Living Shadow is going to cast these abilities anyway, but we can squeeze more damage by trying to maximize how many targets Living Shadow hits. And now moving on to the final topic, which is of course, learning how to use unmend. The general rule for using unmend is whenever we're forced to disconnect from the boss, but we still want to roll our GCD, we press unmend. But as you know, pressing this unmend actually delays the timeline by that one GCD. So how can we figure out when it's worth to use unmend or not? There are 2 ways to figure it out. One, we can head to the spreadsheets and try to figure out what we're going to lose if we're going to press that unmend, or 2, we can use math. There's actually an equation to figure out how much time can pass before pressing unmend is a gain. Now, if we take this equation and solve for x, that number comes out to be around 1.5 seconds. Meaning, on average, if we are forced into 1.5 seconds of downtime or more, it is worth pressing unmend. But that also means if the downtime is 1.49 seconds or less, it's generally more worth to clip your GCD instead. So there we have it. This is pretty much all the information that I utilized during the Cruiserweight tier and what got me to rank 1. In the description below, I've linked a text guide made by Viant Stardust, a Dark Knight mentor from The Balance. A lot of the information in the guide I've gone over in this video, but there's a lot more depth. So for those of you who prefer that format, feel free to go ahead and check that out. If you have any more questions about Dark Knight or any job in general, feel free to join my Discord or tune into my live streams. I will answer every single one of your questions, and you can ask me as many as you want. Also, make sure to like the video if you found any of this information useful. It also helps me know to make more videos like this, and leave a comment on what job you want me to cover next. I may not be rank 1 on every job, but I know how to play them pretty well. Also, make sure to subscribe. We are so close to 1,000 subscribers, so please, please, please consider, and I'd very much appreciate it. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.